perception. The first way they start is the thresholds. In order for you even to sense anything, you have to have a minimum amount of stimulation. And they've done research, what was his name? Gustav Fechner and Ernst Weber. I think it was Ernst Weber. Yeah, they did the research on absolute thresholds and the threshold it takes to notice the difference between the two. I want to make sure I got the guy's name right. It is Ernst Weber. Okay, Ernst Weber. All right, cool. So absolute threshold. These are two simple concepts. And difference threshold. These are both, again, Gustav Fechner and Ernst Weber. These are pretty simple, I think. Absolute threshold is just the minimum amount of any stimuli or stimulus that you would need to even detect it at all. So for sound, the amplitude, the minimum amplitude for us to hear anything is if it's a 0, we can't hear it. But as soon as it's above 0, we're able to hear it. All right, so that's the absolute threshold for hearing. And then of course, I think I told you guys, this isn't an absolute threshold, but after 85 decibels, prolonged exposure can damage your hearing in the long term. But you need to be above a 0 to even hear it, otherwise you won't hear anything at all. All right. So for sound, for example, this would be anything above 0 decibels. You can hear. Does anybody remember what it was for light? One you saw in the notes like a month ago.
5 photons.
Yeah, 5 photons or like rays of light basically are required for you to notice it at all. Otherwise, to you it's just pitch black. If it's 3 or 4 photons, to you it's just black. But after that, you can actually detect there being some light as opposed to 0. It's really hard to get 0 light. There's always some form of light coming in. You could completely darken your room, but odds are there's some rays getting in from outside unless you've like totally sealed your room off. So you can do it. It's just difficult to do unless you have 0 windows and your doors completely sealed. Like even those little lights coming in through the cracks at the bottom. 0 light would mean you wouldn't even know where that door was. You wouldn't even know if you're close to a wall or not unless you could feel it or hear the sound coming off like right next to you. That's what it would take. So yeah, 5 photons of light. Difference threshold is somewhat consistent for humans, but it's not exactly consistent because again, as you age, your vision and hearing become worse. So you noticing a difference in volume or a difference in light intensity might vary individually, but that's essentially what this is. The difference threshold is the minimum amount required to notice a difference in volume or amplitude, I guess. Volume or brightness. So if I increase the amount of light or I increase the amount of sound, this is the minimum amount it would require for you to notice. Oh, you made it louder. Oh, you made it quieter. Oh, it's now dimmer. Or, oh, it's now brighter. That's the difference threshold. So I could actually add tiny little bits, whether they're light photons or a slight raise in amplitude, and you wouldn't notice that it was actually increased. There is a minimum amount required for you to notice, okay, that's louder, or okay, that's quieter. It's really hard to do that because it's such a tiny amount, but it is possible. Anyone ever heard that expression? I can't exactly remember how it goes, but like it's like the boiling. Like if I were to put you in a thing of water, and you're in there, and I just slowly increase the temperature, like 0.001 degrees, like every second. How long would it take you to notice that the water had actually gotten much warmer? A long time or a short time? It would take a long time, right? Because you don't even notice those little increases, and by the time it's amounted to enough to even detect, your body's adjusted to this new level. So it would take a long time. There's some saying that I forget how to phrase it about like the frog boiling in the pot, because if you just put them in there and then you slowly increase the heat, they won't even notice they're boiling until it's they're already boiling essentially. Or dead. So that's kind of what that means. If you go slow enough, people can't really detect it easily. That's a difference threshold. Okay, and then what was the other term attached to this? Was it signal detection? Yeah, signal detection. This one is your ability to essentially like pick up a sound or whatever stimulus based on your experience. So if I gave you a bunch of like, how could I, if I just like did a generic jungle sound, right? It's a bunch of like bugs and you hear like a monkey and you know what I'm talking about, like you're trying to go to sleep or something like that, you can look up sounds of sometimes like jungle music or rainforest music. Not music, but sounds. Would you be able to detect the specific sound of that a dung beetle makes? Would you be able to?
No.
No, I wouldn't either. Why not? I don't know what it sounds like, right? So signal detection it's kind of two things. Number one, it's your ability to pick up a specific stimuli out of a bunch. So like we would all recognize the sound of the monkey. Like if you play that music and then you hear like a monkey sound, like we'd all recognize that. We wouldn't know the dung beetle though. Would a person who is an expert on dung beetles be able to recognize that sound? They would, right? They can hear this mess of stimuli and they can pick out the one that they're able to distinguish. And it's based on experience too. So I'd have to hear, like using the monkey as the example, I'd have to hear the sound of a monkey in my life and recognize that's what a monkey sounds like for me to even have a chance at noticing when this music's being played, which sound is the monkey. All right, I could probably distinguish the sound, but I wouldn't know what it was necessarily. All right, so there's a bit of experience needed because you have to be able to expect and know what it sounds like, but it's your ability to hear like a bunch of different things and pick out a specific sound. All right, does that make any sense? Okay. Did the sub ever play a video for you guys about passing basketballs around? Okay, they did that one? Good. That one is actually a little bit different. That one's more about selective attention and inattentional blindness, which we'll get to. But that could be a similar thing because you can pick up like the bear in that example. If you were expecting it, you'd be able to see the bear, right? Like the second time you watch it, you're like, oh yeah, there it is. But if you're not anticipating it or you don't have any experience with it, you wouldn't notice it. Like if you had a toddler and they didn't know what a bear was somehow, they wouldn't notice it at all because to them it's just a bunch of things moving around. It's a mix of picking out the stimuli amongst many and having some experience to be able to identify it. So it's both. You guys understand it's both? Right? Because I was like, yeah, you can identify. I was like, yeah, well, you have to know what the sound is to be able to identify it. All right, so identify single stimuli out of many, or stimulus rather, out of many stimuli. All right, stimuli is plural, stimulus is singular. I might accidentally say the wrong one when I'm speaking, but that's what that means. Okay, so while we're talking about attention, let's go to attention before we talk about processing. I love that video. It's a great one. I'm glad he showed it to you. I wasn't sure if he was going to do that or not, but he did. So that one's an example of inattentional blindness. So not only do we need a specific amount just to detect it and to notice the difference and some experience to pull signals out, but we actually have the ability to focus on a specific one if we want. So first we'll talk about, before I get to the inattentional part, the cocktail effect. Or probably more well-known as selective attention. What's selective attention? What you got?
It's like when you focus on one thing above like a mixture of other things.
Yeah, among many, right? So if we were all, this happens like when we have a break. When we have a break, there's multiple people talking, correct? Are you able to hear the one person you're trying to hear? And unless they're so quiet, you can't, I guess. But assuming that they're speaking at a reasonable volume, you can drown out the other sounds and then listen only to the person you're focused on, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's selective attention. I'm getting a whole bunch, but I can kind of pick the one I'm focusing on. Now, there are some things that will, prevent you from that. Like people who have ADD, by the way, not ADHD, ADD. There's some form, I don't know what the error is in their brain with perception, but it's really hard for them to focus on one stimuli. So if there's a whole bunch of sounds coming in, they'll hear them all kind of like the same volume, and it's really hard for them to focus on just the one. So that might put it into perspective. So if you ever say, oh yeah, I have ADD, it's like, you probably don't. I'm pretty sure you can focus in on one thing. We'll talk about that later in the year. By the way, ADHD is totally different. That's where you lack stimulation, so your body is constantly seeking stimulation, whatever it might be. So people that have ADHD are fidgety, like they'll always move around. They might always be like kicking their leg or doing something or tapping the table, and they get up constantly and they move from thing to thing very quickly. That's what ADHD is, and that might hurt your focus because you can't just sit down and do one thing, especially if it's boring. You get bored really quickly, and your body starts trying to stimulate itself, and you do other things. ADD though is like I actually can't pay attention no matter what. ADHD though, if I should just include this in there because it's part of perception anyway. ADHD is different though. If I have something I like, I will lock in on it and I'll stick on that. So like if a person has ADHD, they're gonna really struggle to do things that are kind of boring or monotonous. They'll get bored easily and then their brain will wander off and they'll look for more exciting things, even if they don't try to. However, if they like it, they're sucked in. If they're being stimulated, you can't get them off. They get like hyper focused on that one thing. So that's how people can like play video games for 12 straight hours and forget to go to the bathroom and eat and stuff like that. Like that actually happens. So usually when big games come out, like you have a few deaths because people forget to eat or drink water or go to the bathroom and stuff. I know you're all like, what? Like, look it up, man. It's a real thing. I don't know that they all have ADHD, but I would say it's highly likely because that's how you can get locked in on one thing and get off of it. Not get off of it. Okay, that's selective attention. But if I am focusing my conscious attention and processing on one thing, it makes it really easy not to notice the other things because I'm doing it on purpose. Now, if a threat's coming in, and we'll talk about this in a second, if like I'm talking to you and then there's this like a baseball coming at me, it's been hit from a field or whatever, my brain will pick that up and it'll realize it's a threat because it's coming in quickly. And even if I'm not paying attention to it, it'll divert my attention that way and I'll go to miss it. But if it's not a threat, if it's just kind of a non-threatening thing in the background, the odds of me not noticing it are pretty high, just like you guys saw in that video. It was, I think you'd like watch how many passes the white team had or something, right? Something like that. And you're like really paying attention, trying to count how many passes there are, and you even notice that in the background there's like this bear in a black suit that comes up and does like the moonwalk or something like that. And the first time, you didn't even notice. I remember the first time I did it, I didn't notice the bear, but I do remember specifically when I was watching it, I noticed there was some weird movement in the center. I did not notice there was a bear by any means. When I watched it the second time, I was like, oh my gosh, well, he like walks out, stands there and does the moonwalk. But if it's non-threatening, you don't really detect it, or you're much less likely to detect it. All right, so that's basically how almost all magic tricks work. It's sleight of hand and misdirection. So they'll do things that make you look and focus where they don't want you to, so that they can like slide things in and out, or do whatever it is that they're doing to fool you. Sorry, it's not real magic. They're just making you focus on something so that they can do something without you noticing, if that makes sense. And that's inattentional blindness, which I didn't write up here. So again, so long as the stimuli coming in are non-threatening, I can lock in on one, and I'm much less likely to notice changes in what goes on in the environment, which is also like change blindness. That is when, for example, let's say I come home every day and I don't usually take a good look as to all of the decorations and pictures and arrangements. And if my wife changed something, the odds that I would notice that are probably pretty low unless it was a big thing. Because when I come in, I don't focus my attention on all the details and arrangements. So unless it's a big thing, I'm probably not gonna notice it. So if she like switches a picture out or something, I might notice if she moves something big like the couch or whatever. But yeah, if she changes a subtle detail, I'm not gonna notice it at all. Did he show you the example for this one or no? For change blindness? It's different than the passing the ball thing. This is like when you have a YouTube video, and then like, you know how people like on these videos, they'll be talking and then they'll cut to a scene, they'll cut back to them talking. You know what I'm talking about? So they'll be like, oh, blah, 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 this thing, and then they show a clip of something, or they show a different clip of them talking. That would be like they're doing their video like this, and then they cut to a scene, and they cut back, and it's the same person in the same setting, but like one little thing's changed in the background. Like maybe they changed their shirt, or one of the pictures in the background has changed, or it's not there, or there was a globe there before, but now it's not there. The likelihood you notice that is pretty low if you're focused on the actual message of the video. So they do that sometimes to trick you, and that's what Easter eggs are for the most part. No, actually, Easter eggs in movies are more unintentional blindness, but that's essentially it. It's like a change in the environment that you don't notice because you don't pay attention to it. Your attention is consciously focused elsewhere, and if it's a minor detail, you're not gonna perceive it or pick it up. A big one you will though, or a threatening one you probably will. You guys got that? So what's the difference between unintentional blindness and change blindness then?
Change blindness has more to do with like the environment and like the things around you, and then intentional blindness is more like you're just not paying attention to something and you're like focused on one thing.
Yeah, exactly. That one's less focused on the environment and more focused on just all the stimuli coming in. So I can, even though all these stimuli are coming in, I can pick one and kind of block out the rest and focus on the one. Change blindness is again like an environmental change that you do or don't notice. So like if I change the words on that shelf back there and you didn't notice, that would be an example of change blindness. All right, and that's probably pretty common. If I were to change them, I don't think any of you would notice because you don't really look over there. It's not really that important. But if I got a new projector or I changed the board, you'd probably notice because that's one that you often have your focus on. Or like I changed the desks, obviously you'd notice that one. But subtle changes in the environment, there's a good chance you don't notice them. All right, I know I have something else in that category. Oh yeah, you're all experiencing this right now, sensory adaptation. Actually, you're also experiencing intentional blindness because there's actually tiny little sounds and sources of light coming in, and when I'm talking, you're focusing on me. Or when you ignore me and you start looking at your phone, that's also intentional blindness because you're drowning me out and then looking at your phone or whatever. Sensory adaptation. This one's a cool one. This one I feel bad for my wife for because she probably has ADD, or at least is on the spectrum for it, because she has terrible sensory adaptation. So if something's loud or repetitive or cold or hot or whatever, it will constantly bother her. Whereas me, thankfully, I can drown stuff out super quickly. So sensory adaptation is when you're constantly getting the same stimuli, your body sort of takes your attention away from that stimuli. So for example, when I'm walking around each day, assuming that they're mildly comfortable, do I feel my clothes on me? Nope. But think about it now. Do you feel your clothes on you?
Yes.
You do, yeah. So it's the same thing all day, and as long as it's not like uncomfortable, like for example, right now this part of my neck's starting to get uncomfortable. There's like a little thread or something in there, I think, that's like scratching my neck. I noticed that, but the rest of it I pretty much don't notice. And that's sensory adaptation. So that happens when you jump in the pool initially, assuming it's hot outside and the pool is cooler. It's going to be like really cold. But what happens after a few seconds?
You get used to
Or a
it.
few minutes anyway. Yeah, you get used to it, right? And that's sensory adaptation. It stops alerting you to something that's not changing that you already know. So yeah, the best example I can give though is the clothes. Temperature-wise, I know that the pool is a temperature example, but some of you are probably too hot or too cold in here, but some of you are probably just right. But can you feel the temperature right now? If you think about it, can you feel it? Like, can you be like, all right, it's warm, or it's cold, or it's
Yes.
just,
Yes.
you can, right? But were you noticing it before I talked about it? No, unless you're like shivering or sweating, it's not gonna really jump to your attention. Your body just kind of drowns it out because it's just the same stimulus over and over and over and over and over. This is why I was so happy I have this, and my wife hates it. If there's annoying noises that are constant, my brain just drowns them out like immediately. And thank God, because I used to work at Cold Stone when I was about your age actually, and they repeated the same like 5 songs over and over and over. And I would have gone crazy if I couldn't just block it out. And then people always complain about, they're like, oh my gosh, it's the same damn song. I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't noticed. Like it just goes right out. And my brain just goes, yeah, I already know, and it takes attention away from that. We also lived by railroad tracks, like 2 blocks away from some when I was growing up. And my parents, I don't know, I got lucky, I guess, because both my parents were super annoyed by the trains always going by. Like they'd blow their damn horn. They'd be like, why do they blow the horn so much? Like, and they do blow the horn a lot. But like, I never hear any damn horns because I'm so used to hearing it, and my brain just blocks it out. And I would think that one of my parents would have that too because I got my genes from them. But I guess there was some new combination that they gave me. But regardless, I was super happy about that. And I got to add another one to this. They just put up a veterinary hospital by our house currently, and there's a bunch of dogs, and they're always barking. And my wife just hears the barking all the time. And like after day one, I don't hear any barking. Our dog will bark constantly. Like, why are you? Oh yeah, she's barking at the other dogs. But like, I don't hear it. Thank goodness. My sensory adaptation kicks in super quick for whatever reason. So I appreciate that. Thanks, Random Genes. But anyways, any questions about sensory adaptation? It's just, again, a non-threatening, non-extreme, constant stimulus or stimuli, and your brain just doesn't focus on it. But when you do focus on it, like your clothes, all of a sudden you feel your clothes. You're like, oh, I feel my socks and my pants and my shirt all of a sudden, or my glasses, or whatever it might be. All right, any questions about that? Sweet. And then let's go to processing. So yeah, I think here might be a more clear example for you on bottom-up and top-down processing. So if you actually want to change this on your notes or whatever, that would be great. But again, this is a hard one for a substitute to come in and explain, unless they already know the concept. So bottom-up is, of course, based on just the sensory information processing. And top-down is based on your expectation or experience with it. So here's what I'm talking about. So purely sensory input. And top-down is, you do have to obviously see or hear it, but you have a certain understanding or experience or expectation with that stimulus or stimuli. So that is perception, considering experience or expectation. All right. This, by the way, top down is when, that's why you don't notice sometimes your own spelling errors, because you just read over it, because you sort of expect what the next word is going to be, and you might even have the wrong word or it's missing, but your brain fills it in. That's kind of what this is. That's more of a context effect, but let's see if this helps you out. So, you guys know what that is, right? What is it?
13.
13. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. So if I'm looking at this, right, assuming I wrote it correctly, if I just base it on the sensory input, I see a 1 and a 3, right?
Yes.
Can we agree on that?
Yes.
I know it looks close to a B, but is there a separation there?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so that is a 13. However, it's going to be really hard to see it as a 13 if I do this. Nope, it's really hard to see anything if I use that pen. I want it to be black though, so it matches. Is it easy to see the 13 now?
No.
No, it's really difficult. What are you seeing? Yeah, you see the B now instead. All right, what changed?
You added the letters.
Okay.
The context.
Yeah, the context, my expectation changed, right? So I expect it to be a B. But if I look at the actual sensory, if I just focus on that and I just focus on the lines, it's much easier to see the 13. But when I look at them together and I apply my experience and expectation, it makes it look a lot more like a B essentially. So that can be applied to so many things. Like I told you guys about the wood pile, you can see that differently depending on your experience and knowledge of it. But this is probably the most clear-cut example of, if I just look at the sensory info, it's a 13. But when I put it in this context and my expectations are included, that's top-down processing, where I anticipate that and perceive it as a B, even though it's actually a 13. It'd be different though if I went like this. What is it now more clearly? 13, right? And it actually looks clearer too. Like it's not as easy to confuse it with a B. You could like focus in on it and think that it kind of looks like a B, but this is, again, me applying my expectation and perception, or my expectation to the perception of those numbers. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
How about this one? Actually, this was brought up earlier today. We talked about that experiment where they went out and they would find Republicans and Democrats, and then to explain stuff that either Trump or Obama did, and they would flip it. So like, they'd start them off like, oh, to a Democrat, here's this thing that Obama did. And then their expectation was what? That it'd be a good or a bad thing?
Bad.
You guys got that screwed up, actually. It's a Democrat, and I'm like, here's something Obama did.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah, their expectation is it's going to be a good thing. So they hear the information, even if it is actually sounding bad, and they're either going to defend it or think it's a good thing, right? And then they find out, oh, it was actually a Trump thing. And then the same thing in reverse for Republicans. They would go up and say, oh, here's the thing that Trump did. So their expectation is, oh, it's going to be a good thing, or oh, I have to defend it. And then they find out actually that it was an Obama thing. So if they had just listened to what it was, and thought about if it was good or bad, that would be more so an example of bottom-up processing, whereas top-down would be them applying their expectations. So if they think it's coming from the leader of their political party, in the recent past, they would expect it to be something they support, not something that they would oppose. Does that make sense? All right. So that's bottom-up and top-down processing. Okay, and so those are covered. Now we just have the perception regarding Gestalt principles and facial recognition. Cool, that actually is a good timing for us today. I need new markers because mine are dying. All right, this is actually one of the 4 sort of cornerstones of contemporary psychology. They're evolutionary, biopsychosocial, cognitive, and Gestalt. So that's one of the 4. And the reason why they're separate from the other 3 is it is distinguishable. So biopsychosocial is the interaction of your genes with your environment and with society, essentially. Basically, your mind, biology, and society all kind of interplaying, because they do affect you. Like there's things you will do in the presence of certain people and you won't do in the presence of others, right? Like your parents or your friends or whatever. You can act differently in front of them. Then there's also evolutionary, like the influences we have from our evolutionary past, whether they're motivations or their instincts or their emotional responses or our network of frontal lobe development that allows us to see other perspectives and problems, all that stuff. Cognitive would be, of course, seeing how the brain actually works mechanically with the neurochemicals and the actual structure and all of that. And lastly is Gestalt. Because we have, and this is why it's separate, we have this weird predisposition to group things and give things meaning and continuity. And we don't even do it on purpose, our mind just automatically does that. So that's what Gestalt principles are. They're one of those 4 cornerstones of contemporary psychology. Gestalt principles. All right, so this basically is your predisposition, and again, it's really hard to not see this. To group things together or see continuity between things, if there is any, or what's the third one? Group continuity. I'm blanking. This is what happens after you've been doing this for like 10 hours straight. If someone could look that up, that'd be wonderful. Grouping, continuity, and what else? That's one of the applications of it. I know I'm forgetting one.
Home.
What? Oh, seeing things as a whole. Thank you. Yes, that is actually different. This is grouping multiple things together. This is seeing continuity between things, and this is actually it's kind of like grouping, but you're seeing them as a whole instead of individual parts. All right, and we have a predisposition for this. This is why I can arrange and cut flowers in a certain pattern. And I can actually like see a message. I just saw one the other day from Disneyland. It was super simple. It was like they had like the green grass part around, and then they had like white flowers. On the inside was like the flowers, like yellow flowers in like a Mickey head shape or a Mickey face, right? I could just look and see a bunch of flowers, but it's almost impossible for a human to look at that and not see the Mickey face. Like you can't just look and be like, yeah, those are flowers. It's really hard for you to separate them in your head and not just see the Mickey face. That's a Gestalt principle. You want to see things as a whole and continuous or grouped together. So some examples are, if I draw this on the board, oops. My mind automatically sees 4 lines, right? What are the 4 lines that I see? Yeah, but like why? Why didn't you look at them that way?
Because we were grouping them by the colors.
Yeah, you group them by color automatically. Even if I added this other one to make it like perfectly symmetrical as far as the number goes either way. None of you are interpreting this as 4 lines that way. You're interpreting it as 4 lines vertically, right? Not horizontally. And again, that's because your mind automatically groups them together. Did anybody immediately think, oh, that is 16 individual dots, 8 of which are white, 8 of which are black? Anyone think that? No, everyone thought there's 2 white lines and 2 black lines, right? Even though that they're separate units and all of that, we automatically group them together. And then when we don't have this grouping, it looks weird to us. It's almost like we see nothing. Like if you had to describe it, it'd be almost hard to describe. I hope I don't accidentally make a pattern here, which I might do.
So we like grouping things together.
What?
Oh, no, I was making a joke that we like grouping things together.
Yeah, that I do it automatically. Yeah, I don't think there's a sign in there. I didn't like accidentally make a swastika or something, so that's nice. That'd have been terrible. I'm like, well, we cut that one out. But yeah, that's harder to think about. Then you really have to consciously try to count the lines because you don't naturally see it. So when I look right at that, it just looks like a mess. And I actually tried to find a pattern in it. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but did you immediately like try to look for a pattern? Yeah, because you try to find some continuity or grouping, and when there isn't any, it's hard for us. It'd be the same thing if I did a bunch of random dots, like all over the place, like all the same color. Are those all just a bunch of dots randomly put on a board?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but what does my mind automatically do in at least a couple of those areas?
Focus on the one that's
Focus on the group.
Yeah, you focus on the groupings, right? Almost like they're galaxies or something or stars in a galaxy that are clumping together. We do that automatically. There's another, so that's all grouping. So that's the grouping and or seeing them as a whole, not quite so much as a whole, but here's the continuity or seeing them as a whole. So if I drew 3 lines, or 4 lines, yeah, 4 lines. I'm gonna draw 4 lines. Did I randomly draw 4 lines? Well, I didn't randomly draw them, I guess, but are those 4 lines separate?
Yes.
They are. But what does my brain actually see? You see one continuous line. You have breaks in it, but you see one continuous line. You almost see like a serpent, right? Or something like that that might be swimming in the water or whatever. There's other examples too of, I can do this with any assortment of lines if I'm doing something like this. Wait, hold on. What do you see automatically? Yeah, you see a triangle, right? You got some differences, but none of you were like, I see 3 circles and 6 lines. No one says that. You automatically see the triangle, and then maybe you could sort of dissect and go down, but you automatically group things and see them as a whole, or like the lines I gave you, you automatically see them as one continuous line, even though they are broken apart. And that is a specific predisposition that we humans have. All right, so I think I gave an example for all of them. Yeah, this was the serpent, this was the circles and lines that are actually, you see it as a triangle, and then this is the dots that I showed you. You don't just see them as, in fact, it's hard to see if they are random dots up there, but if I put them in those 4 lines, you just automatically see those 4 lines. Okay, and one thing I can expand on that with is the figure ground phenomena. I'm not gonna be able to draw this very well, but there is something that sets this apart from the other phenomena. Which one was it that I was gonna talk about? Oh, perceptual set. That was the other one I was going to talk about. Yeah. So here's the difference between the two. This confuses some people. Figure ground. I definitely cannot draw the perceptual set one. Do you guys remember that image he showed you that looked like potentially the head of a bird or a rabbit? Yeah. I'll try to draw that, but I'm not going to be able to do that. Perceptual set. Because this does confuse some of the students. Figure ground is, you are looking at one image, but it's actually two different parts of the image. And it's really hard for you to separate the two, or sorry, combine the two. So if you look at one, the other one becomes the background. So the common example is the vases or faces one, where it's something like this. Oops. Something like that. Not the best faces, but. So the way I colored it, to me, the vase kind of sticks out. But if I focus on those faces, which aren't really drawn that well, do I still see the vase? No, it becomes the background, actually. You can't really focus on, once I focus on the vase, the faces go all the way, they become the background. I don't notice the detail in them. And then when I focus on the faces, that vase becomes the background. So that's the figure ground phenomenon. If there's two things that are 2D, but you look at one of them, the other one becomes like the second plane. It becomes like the background. But I am focusing on two different parts of it. So the difference between this and a perceptual set, and this is where people get confused, is a perceptual set is I'm looking at the exact same image, but I can see it two different ways. All right, so here I'm actually looking at two different planes, right? So image one that I could see might be the vase, and then image two might be those faces. You with me on that? So you're actually looking at two different images technically. I realize it's one, but you can perceive two different images inside of it. For the, and I'm not gonna be able to do this very well, something like this. Hey, that ain't that bad. Okay. Something like that. There we go. I'll actually make this a picture too. This is the phenomenon where it's really hard. Well, first of all, you have a predisposition to see one for whatever reason. Some of you would look at this and see a weird bird looking up at the sky. And then some of you would see a bunny looking the other direction, but also kind of upward towards the sky. Can you see both at the same time? No, you can't. And usually, if this is like the first time you ever see this picture, you'll only see one of them. You won't even see the other one. Like, you'll be like, yeah, what's the picture of the bird for? And then someone tells you it's a bunny, and you're like, no, oh my gosh, it's a bunny. And then they realize, oh my gosh, it's a bird, and you flip between the two. But I'm only looking at the same image. Like for this one, because it's figure ground, when I look at one, the other fades away into the background. This one's not fading into the background. It's still a part of the same image you're looking at. So I'm only looking at this, but there's two different ways to perceive it. It's like 1A is the bird, and then 1B is the bunny. That was perfect, because the B is for bunny. But I'm looking at the exact same image. I'm not like, nothing becomes the background. Not like anything fades in and out. I'm looking at the same thing, but my mind can only see either the bird, now looks weird because I put this here, or the bunny at the same time. All right, and again, try to recall the first time you saw it. You probably only saw one of those things, whether it was the bird or the bunny, and then it was mentioned, and you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, it does look like both, but you can only see one at the same time. So that's the best stab I can take at differentiating between the two. Is figure ground, it actually becomes two different images. This one, it's the same image, you just see it differently. You're focused on the one part. Because am I focusing on the background here at all? Does the background change this image at all? No, it doesn't, right? Becoming a bunny or a bird, I don't even need the background at all. Like I could have just left it like this. And it'd be the same thing. But if I took the background of this one, it would be pretty much just a vase. It'd be hard to see the faces if it wasn't there. Make sense? All right, cool. Last part then, before we go, is some research with our visual cortex that was done by Torsten Wiesel. And, who's the guy? I wrote his name down because I knew I'd forget. David Hubel. There we go. And I've talked about feature receptors before, but the thing I want to mention here is they're the ones that really did a lot of work on how we actually perceive things like distance or unique features. So I think I forgot the term actually, perceptual constancy. So perceptual constancy. And feature receptors, they both are closely similar. Perceptual constancy allows me to look at any one person, like I just pictured my wife, but you can picture anybody, your mom, your dad, whatever. Can you tell it's them if they're facing sideways? Can you tell it's them if they're facing backwards?
Yep.
You can, right? You have this ability, or upside down, right? All of these things, you can perceive them no matter how, which way they're rotated. Do they look exactly the same from all angles? No, they don't. But your ability to be able to know that even though the information you're getting is different, like they look slightly different, they're angled differently, or they're at a different distance, it's still the same person. So I know it's a cat, whether the cat's colored green or a natural color, or it's facing away from me or towards me or running. I'm able to realize that that shape, that pattern is a cat, and I can even identify usually which cat it is. Like, that's my cat, you know, my cat's name is Lunchables. Like, that's Lunchables. Yep. You know, and you can tell which one it is specifically because you're able to recognize it. That also has a little bit to do with feature receptors too, not receptions. Feature receptors too, because that's what enables you to actually distinguish between faces, right? The reason why I can like look at you and I know your name is because I can recognize the difference between you and the next person. If I have these feature receptors in my frontal lobe and visual cortex, if they're damaged in any way, I can no longer recognize people. I might know you and know, oh, this is something you've done. But if you show up every time and be like, hi, hello, like I won't know who you are, basically. And then you can remind me, oh, I'm your student, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd be like, oh, yeah, I remember you did this thing and this thing. And then you could go walk around the corner, come back around, and I wouldn't recognize your face still. I might recognize your voice maybe, but the ability for us to distinguish unique patterns and like store those in our memory, that's largely because of our feature receptors. Does anybody, by the way, know how you can tell how you can tell the texture of somebody? Yeah, we'll say distance. How far away you can tell they are. Obviously, I could tell if they're going away, they get smaller, and if they come closer, they get larger. But let's say they're not moving. How would I know that their nose is closer to me than their cheek?
Is that your depth perception?
It is your depth perception, right? And I'll actually talk for a moment about that. So for this to even occur, it'd be possible, I have 2 eyes and 2 ears. Otherwise, I can't tell from what direction something's coming, or in the case of vision, I can't tell exactly how far away it is to get my depth perception. All right, so if I only had 1 ear and a line was sneaking up behind me, how would I know it was sneaking up behind me? Could I if I had 1 ear? No, I might be able to hear the lion, but would I know what direction it's coming from? Almost certainly not. Why does 2 ears allow me to do that?
2 sets, or like 2 different, this is gonna take in information.
But how do they differentiate as to like it's coming from my left or from behind me or from the front or whatever? How would I know?
Because like if it's coming from your, if it's on like your right side, the frequency on the right side will like trigger.
I still get the frequency in my left ear. Because like if, assuming it's loud enough, the sound's gonna, yeah, it'll go to my right ear, but it'll also go to the tree next to me, bounce off and come back to my left ear. What's the difference though? Yes, the difference is the amplitude. So I'm gonna be getting more direct sound waves, but they're also gonna be louder too. So if somebody's approaching me from the right, I actually hear with both ears, but 1 ear is getting a much clearer, louder message. So that's the way how I would know, oh, it's coming from this direction, because this one's getting this much signal and this one's getting just that much signal. So I automatically know from which way it's coming. Same with the eyes, but a little bit differently. If I'm just looking at one thing with 1 eye, it's actually 2D. It's no longer 3D to me. I might be able to gauge that a bit based on like lighting and shadow, just like you can kind of draw a 3D picture on a 2D surface, but I won't be able to accurately, consistently place my self in that 3D space. I need that second eye to give me the little differences in distance so I can gauge exactly where it is. And again, that's why you can draw things that look 3D. And if you close your eye in one eye, you can see and you know, oh, that's 3D, that's not 2D. But it's basically the same thing as if you were to try to touch this in a different spot or further back or whatever. You wouldn't be able to consistently. Did I show you guys that when I put the pen down and I tried to touch it when I had one eye closed? Yeah, you can do it randomly, but it's much harder and you have to do it much more slowly. So that second bit of information from a different angle allows me to see exactly how far away it is as opposed to a 2D picture when I don't know exactly. Because again, there's slightly different angles on these pupils. So then I can actually tell, oh, it's actually a little bit further away to the right or a little bit further away to the left, and that's the only way I'm able to actually perceive it. But if it's too far away, I can't because I don't have enough information. Unless I can see the thing getting smaller, I know it's going away, or I can see it getting closer, I know it's getting, or it's getting bigger, then I know it's getting closer, essentially. So that's how those two work. Oh, do you guys remember what it's called if you can't recognize faces? Yeah, prosopagnosia, that's correct. So fine feature receptors damaged, not working for whatever reason, prosopagnosia. All right, and that's depth perception, and just know that because I think there was actually one year you had to like explain why you needed 2 eyes or 2 ears or something like that. So that's why I always talk about that. So have a basic understanding. It's basically just to know how something's far away or not. You gauge the distance with your 2 eyes because they can see slightly different distances at different angles, but also lighting too. Like if I make something dimmer, my brain interprets that as being further away. That's why makeup works the way it does. If people want to make their nose seem smaller or bigger, they can use makeup to add lighting or add shadow. If you add shadow, it makes it look like it has more depth. And if you add lighting, it makes it look like it's a little bit more of a flat surface, essentially. So that's why, like, I know men don't typically use makeup, but women, if they want to like make their cheekbones seem more pronounced than they actually are, they can put some darkening like under the cheeks here to make it look like their cheekbones protrude a little more. Or they can do it with their eyes, or like I said, they often do that with their nose. If they want to make the nose seem like it's like maybe their noses, they think it's too small, they want to make it seem longer, or vice versa, they can actually use shading to do that. And if you add shading, it adds depth, and if you take shading away, it makes it seem more shallow. And that's how we perceive things. So perception, there's ways you can detect things unconsciously, and that can actually affect your perception, and that can actually affect how you view people and other things. Oh, outside I'm hearing like music. Okay. So anyways, what's the way I can actually still take in information that I'm not even aware of, actually? So if I'm focused on talking to a person, I'm still taking all this information, my brain's actually still processing it, even though I'm not aware of it. What's that one called?
Dual processing.
Yeah, dual processing, correct. So the example we give is how if I am talking to somebody and that baseball stuff starts coming at me from off in the distance, even though I'm not paying attention to that baseball, I'm still processing the information. So my brain, even though it's not consciously aware of it, is going to notice that and then alert my conscious attention to that. And I'm going to take maneuvers to avoid that ball coming in. But I'm doing it constantly. Like I constantly am gauging how far away you are, what your texture is, what the temperature is, all these things, but I'm not even aware of it. However, I'm still processing the information. Because I don't know if I've ever showed you guys this, but referring to processing speed and power, like we use in computers, your conscious focus is only like 40-ish bits of information, whereas the unconscious bits you're taking in are well over 1 million bits. So it's a pretty drastic change. So dual processing, that's what that is. Taking in and processing conscious and unconscious information. So what does that have to do with the next topic, which I'll describe here in a second, subliminal messaging. What is that? What does dual processing have to do with subliminal messaging? So this is me taking in all the info. Then what's the application of subliminal messaging?
For subliminal messaging, you're like not aware that you're like reading the message that it has.
Yeah.
Makes sense? So So like you're focused on something else, but you're also like unconsciously taking in that like message, the unknown message.
Okay, fair enough, but what impact does that have? Because that could just be dual processing, because I'm still taking information even though I might not be aware of it. So even if it's too fast for me to recognize, like if I show you an image and I splice in little other images and they're coming at you so fast you can't even actually see them, your brain still does register the info. What impact does that have
It
then?
like impacts your perspective on the thing you're like looking at. For example, you like the gargoyle one we did.
Yeah.
That impacted their view on the dude. So when they spliced the image of the gargoyle, they were like, oh, he seems like not a good person, or he's like a little creepy. And then when they spliced the image of the baby, they're like, oh, he seems like
Yeah,
a good guy.
exactly. In fact, we'll actually, for the video anyway, we'll use the example that they've actually, the study they've actually done, because that one was made up, but it's the same idea. So they gave Group A a picture and Group B a picture. So it was randomly selected, randomly assigned. It was just a guy, a smiling guy, same guy, exact picture. I know that I didn't write them exactly the same, but it's the same exact picture. There's Group A and Group B. They saw this picture and they were asked to rate what their perception of this guy was. Right? So if you just looked at the picture and there was nothing else going on, you'd be like, he looks like a smiling, pleasant guy in this picture. However, when the reports came in, Group A overwhelmingly thought this guy looked creepy or untrustworthy, whereas Group B thought this guy looked warm and happy and nice. What was the difference there between the two? Because there was something the experimenters did to affect this.
For the images, they have little splices in the middle, and for group A, that was a group that did like, thought he was creepy, it was a werewolf, and for
Yep.
the other group, it was a puppy.
There we go. Werewolf and a puppy were spliced in. So, for those of you that forget, or those on the internet, what they did was they gave this image, but what they did was they spliced in little micro images. No, actually, it's a full-sized image, but they're so fast you can't actually detect it. Where a werewolf was spliced in. So they're looking at this guy's picture, this image, and they're actually seeing really quickly images of a werewolf, like this ferocious werewolf. So even though they're not aware that they're seeing this werewolf while they're looking at this guy because it's coming in and out so fast, their brain still perceives it. So what feeling do they get when they're perceiving this werewolf without knowing it? Because they're unconsciously processing it still. What feeling do they get?
Yeah, like a uneasy.
Yeah, they get like an uneasy feeling, right? So because they look at this picture and they don't know they're actually seeing little images of a werewolf come up really, really quickly, they get this uneasy feeling. So who do they apply that uneasy feeling to? Yeah, the guy, right? Which is why this guy was defined as creepy or untrustworthy. But the puppy, which most people respond warmly to or happy to see, that also affected their perception. So that caused them to see the guy as what?
Kind.
Nice.
Yeah, kind, nice, trustworthy, exactly. So the feeling they got from this was like warm, nice. And then they obviously didn't know they were looking at a puppy, an image of a puppy coming in really quickly. So they applied that feeling to this guy and he seemed warm and nice and whatnot. And this is actually so effective that they used it initially to advertise. They would splice in images of people like drinking a Coke or whatever. So you'd be watching this movie and all of a sudden you would crave a Coke and you wouldn't know why. It's because they were actually altering your perception unknowingly. So then you're more likely to go up and to buy a Coke after getting this thirst and this quench for it, or popcorn or whatever it might be. All right, that's subliminal messaging. So don't mix the two up. This is your ability to take in information consciously and unconsciously, even if it's so fast you don't really realize it. And this is the impact it has on your perception. So again, I get the uneasy feeling from seeing these, even though I don't know it, and I apply it to the guy I'm looking at. I perceive him differently. Same with the puppy, but the reverse, happy instead of untrustworthy. You guys got that? Sweet.